Welcome back to Doctors Teach, the podcast where we take the mystery and the mess out of resident remediation. So here's the question for today. What actually happens at the end of remediation? Because newsflash, it doesn't just quietly dissolve on its own. There's this moment, a decision point, where the program has to determine, did the resident meet their goals? Is the plan working? And can we confidently say they're ready to move forward? So most importantly here, can we prove it? So today, I'm breaking down what successful completion looks like, when it makes sense to extend a plan, and why your final data presentation to the GMEC is one of the most important moments in the entire process. So let's get into it. All right, so the end of remediation isn't just a gut check. It's really a decision that must be grounded in data. I talk about data all the time. So this is the part where your remediation team reviews the resident's performance, weighs the evidence, and then prepares a recommendation that gets sent to the GMEC. This is where you say, here's what we've observed, here's what we measured, and here's what changed. It's evidence-based, structured, and defensible. It must be based on data and not vibes. All right, let's dive into case number 1, successful completion. We have a PGY2 resident who was placed on remediation after concerns in communication and documentation where the notes were unclear and patients were leaving confused. So the plan that we put together included weekly direct observation, a chart review checklist, patient communication workshops, and then over the 12 weeks, the data showed consistent growth. So as we're looking at all of the data and really monitoring resident progress, faculty observed better patient encounters. They noted that documentation improved. They also saw that feedback from nurses and staff was largely positive. So the resident even submitted a self-assessment that matched the external feedback. That never happens, right? But this was a huge win. So in this particular situation, goals were met, the data was documented, and the CCC recommended successful completion. So that was the recommendation that they gave to the GMEC. And then the GMEC said, wow, thanks for lobbing a ball straight over the plate. Let's hit it out of the park. Let's approve it. And that's really what successful completion looks like. It's a no-brainer. The data supports the decision made. And at the end of the day, we can really support that recommendation. All right, so let's look at another case. Case number 2, plan extension was needed. In this particular case, we have a PGY1 resident who had broad issues across multiple competencies, which included timeliness, knowledge gaps, and clinical reasoning. So it's kind of the trifecta, right? The plan showed some improvement over the course of the remediation. They were showing up on time, engaging more actively, but their clinical decision-making still required some heavy supervision, which isn't ideal, but you know what? They were engaged and really making an attempt to show that they were striving to really meet the requirements and do everything the remediation plan had outlined for them to do. So in this particular case, the CCC said, all right, this resident, they are on the right track, but they're not quite there yet. The decision was made to extend the remediation another 6 weeks with updated goals and support that were focused just on clinical reasoning. So looking at the progress that the resident made, and then the decision to extend the remediation another 6 weeks with those updated goals and additional support, that's not failure. It's responsible, supportive education. At the end of the remediation, you have 3 possible options. Let's look at all 3 of these. So successful completion where all goals are met, like in our case number 1 that we just discussed. Extension where progress is made, but they're not quite there yet, and maybe more time is needed. That's what we discussed in case number 2. And then your third option is escalation, where maybe the plan failed. You may need to move to probation. We'll hit this in a future episode, but the takeaway here is let the data guide the decision. And trust me, we can talk about escalation plan failure in several different episodes down the line. All right, moving along. Common mistake number one that I see all too often is not enough data. What you can't do is say, we think they've improved without showing how, right? We need the evidence, and that's not evidence. No observation notes, no documented feedback, no milestone remeasurement, then you're not ready to present. You're not ready to talk to the GMEC and make a recommendation because the data is what tells the story. If you have no data, you essentially have no story. So there's no documentation. It absolutely didn't happen. And every single goal that your resident has in that remediation process needs measurable proof. Common mistake number two, vague success criteria. All right, this is one of my favorites. You can't track growth if you never defined the target. So when you say improve communication, that means nothing unless you specify what exactly they need to do differently, how you're going to measure that, and then how often you're going to track it. So you have to be able to define what success looks like, and residents can't read between the lines. In this case, specificity protects everyone and especially the resident. So if you come up with a goal for a resident, you need to know exactly what success looks like and what you're going to do to measure that and how often it's tracked. All right, common mistake number three, weak documentation of the decision. So you get through the entire remediation process, things are going well, and then the CCC makes a decision. Somebody better be writing that down. At a minimum, you need to document the following: the vote, the rationale behind the vote, you need a summary of the data, and GMEC approval needs to be captured in the minutes. So your whole process needs to be traceable. It needs to be as if someone comes in and wants to take a look at the entire remediation plan from start to finish through the decision. They need to be able to say, all right, I can tell without a doubt what exactly took place during this remediation plan. And this is the data that was used to make the decision. And yes, the data that they used does absolutely support the recommendation to the GMEC. This is important. So let's recap. What does success really look like? How do you know you're even doing it right? Well, you need to ask yourself these questions. Did the data support the outcome? Does the resident know exactly what happened and why? And could you defend this process tomorrow if it were challenged? If the answer is yes, then you've absolutely done it right. But if you can't answer yes, it's time to go back to the drawing board and figure out where things started to fall apart. Was it the data? Was it the remeasurement? Or was it even the baseline data in the first place? And if someone were picking up your remediation packet and reading it from start to finish, could they tell you without a doubt what happened throughout the duration of that remediation plan? All right, my final thoughts on this whole episode. Basically, don't rush the finish, let data guide the outcome. And if you don't have the data to be able to support any decision that you want to make, go back and gather that data. Don't rush the finish line. Whether the plan ends or continues, make sure it's the data that makes the call, not your emotion, not fatigue. And trust me, there's a lot of it, and certainly not wishful thinking. And if you don't have what you need to decide, like I've said in prior episodes, hit that pause button. Don't be afraid to hit the pause button and fill in the gaps. Then you can come back when you're ready. There's no set timeline, and it just sets the resident up for success, and it really keeps the integrity of your program intact. All right, in the next episode, we're going to talk about what happens if a resident is brilliant academically, but terrible with teamwork and communication. Yup, we're really going there. If this episode helped clarify how remediation should wrap up, if you wouldn't mind, leave a quick review or share it with your CCC chair. Trust me, they'll thank you when it's time to present to the GMEC. As always, thank you so much for supporting my podcast. And if you're watching on YouTube and you want to make the end of remediation crystal clear, download the free introductory lesson of the Elevate Remediation Fast Track course, or take the free remediation risk assessment at www.docmaclearning.com. Links are in the description. Grab what you need and finish strong. And I'll see you in the next episode.